There was no sound, no shift, no warning at all. The K9 just stared, stone still, like he was letting the man decide his own fate. But when that hand came down to strike, when arrogance turned into action, he launched. And when his jaws locked around the man's arm, what followed wasn't just pain. It was the sound of bone crunching in front of 282 Navy SEALs, because this wasn't a threat. It wasn't a stunt. It was the last mistake that man ever made. Now, before we show you the exact moment Rex moved, and the face of the man who didn't walk away the same, drop a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from. Tap like, hit subscribe, and turn on the bell icon, because today, the dog didn't bark. He answered. The wind came in sharp and salty off the water, carrying the rhythmic clang of metal gates, and distant orders barked across the asphalt. Fort Thorne's northern yard stretched open like a tactical amphitheater, carved into the coastal base where the Pacific slammed against reinforced seawalls just past the horizon. This wasn't a place for recruits. It wasn't even standard grounds for active personnel. This yard was reserved for evaluation, where final stage equipment, elite protocol drills, and joint assets were tested in front of command. And today, 282 Navy SEALs had gathered. Some leaned against steel bleachers in loose formation. Others stood in their units, arms crossed or resting on belts, boots grounded. All of them faced a cleared rectangular space in the center, painted with white outline markers, red cones, and motion-activated surveillance poles. It looked like a combat box, because that's what it was. The buzz wasn't loud. These weren't fresh cadets excited by gear or dogs or explosions. These were warfighters. They came to observe how assets function under real-time pressure. Today's showcase, a K9 tactical demonstration, obedience, threat detection, and passive takedown technique. A lean, angular Belgian Malinois sat poised on the edge of the marked zone, panting lightly, eyes fixed forward. His coat was dense charcoal and sand blend, glinting in the sunlight with a darker patch running from snout to spine. A thick tactical vest hugged his frame, marked with a single-stitched name on the harness strap, Rex. Beside him stood his handler. Square posture, no sunglasses, gloved hands folded behind his back, jaw clenched but steady. His name was Chief Petty Officer Malcolm Rigg. Rumor said he hadn't raised his voice in over 6 years. Didn't need to. He didn't bark commands. He breathed them. Rigg gave off the kind of cold focus you didn't associate with showmanship. His uniform was regulation, but faded at the creases, field-worn, clean but not crisp. On his wrist, a worn band of paracord, and on his chest, the subdued navy blue pin of Joint Maritime Interdiction. He gave a quick hand signal. Rex stood. One movement, no noise, no twitch, just the clean, silent rise of an animal forged for decision. Captain Dorsey, overseeing the demonstration, gave a nod. Begin when ready. From the perimeter, SEALs leaned forward slightly. This wasn't a showcase for tricks or civilian obedience cues. This was a vetting session. The K9 unit had recently rotated in from overseas interdiction duty and had been deployed on joint operations across 3 classified zones. The question wasn't whether the dog could sit or bark on command. The question was, could he read tension before it surfaced? Could he escalate, strike, and disengage, all in sequence and without chaos? Chief Rigg walked with measured steps toward the center cone, Rex matching pace on the left. They moved like a single machine. Stillness followed them. This was not entertainment. This was proof, and every man watching had worn real blood on his gear. They didn't wear tridents. That was the first thing anyone noticed. The group that entered from the western gate walked in relaxed, even casual. Untucked sleeves, loose packs slung over one shoulder, boots that looked new but scuffed for effect. Naval Security Augmentation Contractors, or NSACs. Outsourced maritime assets, civilian adjacent but armed, cleared for joint observation but not respected. There were 7 of them, in matching gray-blue polos stamped with a coastal security emblem. The leader, or at least the loudest, was a thick-necked man with a sand-colored buzz cut and wraparound sunglasses still perched on his head like a permanent crown. The type of man who grinned before he insulted you. His name, barely visible on the stitched tag, was Garrick. He looked toward the demonstration zone, where Rex sat motionless beside Rig. Then he laughed, loud enough for the rows of seals to hear. Loud enough that it broke the still air like a dropped wrench. "No leash?" he said, cocking his head with faux concern. "Hope someone remembered the tranquilizer." A few of his team chuckled. One of them, a younger guy with too much upper arm for his frame, added, "Looks trained for parades, not fights." They didn't whisper. They weren't subtle. They spoke like spectators at a dog show, unaware or unwilling to care that the audience was made of combat-tested SEAL teams. Or maybe they wanted the attention. Whatever it was, they got it. Two SEALs turned to look, not with aggression, just quiet observation. One of them adjusted his hydration hose without taking his eyes off Garrick. On the field, Rex didn't move. His ears flicked once. That was it. Rig didn't turn his head. He didn't need to. He heard it all. Captain Dorsey, up on the observation riser, shifted slightly, but said nothing. He knew how these things played out. You didn't discipline arrogance by calling it out. You let it walk right into a situation it didn't understand. Still grinning, Garrick folded his arms across his chest. "Bet you $50 that Mutt bolts the second something real goes down." "Mutt's got a name," someone muttered nearby. "A SEAL." His tone wasn't threatening, just matter of fact, the kind of tone that felt heavier than it sounded. But Garrick only raised his eyebrows, unaffected. "What is it, Fluffy?" His team laughed again. One of them actually pointed at Rex, like the dog was part of a comedy act. But Rex didn't twitch, didn't flinch. His eyes were locked on Rig as if nothing else existed. The stillness was no longer peaceful, it was surgical. Because Rex wasn't still from obedience. He was still because he was waiting. And behind that stillness, behind the precision, was something every SEAL in the yard could feel. Not intimidation, not anger, control. And that made Garrick smirk just a little more desperate. But the man didn't know that yet. He just kept watching the dog with the same crooked smile, still thinking he was the apex predator in the room. "Simulation 1, announced Captain Dorsey from the platform. "Controlled entry sweep. K9 will assess threat posture from unknown approach. No verbal stimulus." A low beep triggered from the far pylon. Rig gave no cue. And yet Rex moved, one fluid motion, stepping left, angling front, bracing diagonally toward the perimeter. From a side corridor, a role player appeared, suited in light padding, dressed like a dockside crew member. His pace was brisk but casual, hands at his sides, non-threatening. Rex didn't lunge, didn't bark. He mirrored, step for step, 20 feet, 15, 10. The moment the actor crossed an invisible 5-foot threshold, marked only in the dog's training, Rex stopped dead center in the path. No growl, just posture. Shoulders squared, weight balanced, ears pinned slightly back. The man raised his hands in compliance. Rig spoke, finally. "Stand down." Rex returned to heel position. Perfectly still. A low hum of impressed murmurs rolled through the SEALs, not loud, not performative. Just the kind of acknowledgement that came from knowing what it meant to hold a posture that clean under tension. Garrick clapped slowly. "Oh, I see. Statue school. Must have graduated with honors." Another smirk from his team. Rig said nothing. "Simulation 2, Dorsey called. Passive resistance takedown, controlled aggression, no injury contact." The actor now took on a different role, feigned resistance. Arms crossed, aggressive stance. Rig tapped the side of his leg. Rex surged forward, but it wasn't chaotic. He didn't pounce. He circled, fast, and came to a halt at the actor's right thigh, mouth open, teeth shown but not engaged. The actor flinched. Rex didn't move. "Out!" Rig commanded. Rex backed off exactly 2 paces and sat, chest forward, watching the man's every move. One of the SEALs let out a low whistle. Jesus, like he's waiting for the green light. He was. That was exactly what he was doing. Rex wasn't just trained to obey. He was trained to read variables, watch behavior, calculate thresholds, and act only when the threshold was breached. That's what Garrick didn't get. To him, dogs barked or bit, nothing in between. "Guy's playing dress-up with a canine," Garrick muttered. Then he moved, not dramatically. Just a few steps forward, closer to the red boundary line. Rig's voice cut the air, still calm. Sir, please remain behind the zone markers. Garrick smirked. Relax. I'm just watching. Rex had stopped panting. That was the first visual cue. His mouth closed, his breathing stilled. He didn't shift his weight. He didn't lower his ears. He simply watched Garrick, head tilted 1 degree, jaw muscles tight. It wasn't menacing. It was cold, still, prepared. And that kind of quiet put a chill down the spine of every man in the yard who'd ever kicked in a real door. Garrick stood just outside the mark zone now, hands on his hips. That same half smirk stretched across his face like it had been sewn there. He tilted his head at Rex, then at Rig. That all you got? He called. What's next? Sit, stay, roll over? No one laughed this time. Not even his team. Across the field, a few SEALs had shifted their stances, not dramatically, just small adjustments. Boots planted a little firmer, arms uncrossed, focus sharpened. The kind of movement that said we're no longer watching a demo, we're watching a decision. Rig turned slightly, not to Garrick, just to angle his body between the dog and the encroaching man. Sir, last warning, he said, voice level. You're encroaching an active operation. Garrick took another step forward. He was inside the red line now. Rex didn't move, but his chest rose slower. His ears remained pinned, and his right front paw curled just slightly inward, a detail only the most trained eyes would catch. A trigger posture. Waiting. You think this thing could stop me if I ran at you right now? Garrick said, grinning like a teenager daring a dog behind a fence. No answer. Then he raised his hand. A taunting wave, fingers fluttering just above Rex's eyeline. Nothing. Rex's eyes didn't flicker. His neck didn't shift. But anyone paying attention could tell. The dog wasn't ignoring the movement. He was cataloging it, processing. 2 more of Garrick's team stepped closer to the line, hovering just behind him now, chuckling nervously. Go on, one said. Give him a scare. Let's see the circus act. Rig held up a single-gloved hand, palm facing down, a subtle sign. He wasn't giving a command to Rex. He was broadcasting to the SEALs. I've got this. Do not engage. But Garrick didn't get the message. He took 1 more step, then bent slightly at the waist, bringing his face just a little too close to Rex's. You're just a glorified security system, aren't you? He muttered. I could knock you cold before you even twitched. He made a sudden feint, a quick, jerking gesture toward the dog's head, like a fake punch. Still, Rex didn't move. But something did change. The temperature of the entire field, like a pressure drop before a storm. Even Garrick's own teammates took a half step back, sensing that whatever this was, it had crossed a line. But Garrick, drunk on attention, wasn't done. He looked over his shoulder and chuckled. Then he did it again, this time harder, closer. Rig stepped forward, voice suddenly colder. Back away from the dog. That's when Garrick muttered it under his breath. Not loud enough for all to hear, but loud enough for Rex. A sharp, mocking hiss between his teeth. Let's see you bite. Mutt. The yard held its breath. The dog didn't. Not yet. But the silence had become a fuse, and no one knew how long was left before it ran out. It happened in a heartbeat. No warning howl, no dramatic build-up, no cinematic pause, just a single, instinctive decision made by an animal trained to end threats the moment they became real. Garrick's hand came up again, but this time it wasn't a mock wave or a teasing feint. It was a strike, fast, sharp, directed straight toward Rex's muzzle, the kind of movement that crossed every operational threshold, the kind of motion Rig had spent years conditioning Rex to recognize as immediate danger. And before anyone could say a word, before a command left Rig's mouth, Rex moved, not wildly, not blindly, with lethal precision. His body launched forward in a clean arc, jaws opening mid-air and clamping down around Garrick's forearm just below the elbow. The sound that followed wasn't a bark. It wasn't a growl. It was a dull, bone-deep crunch that seemed to echo across the entire yard. Garrick's scream tore through the silence, raw and shocked, as his body jerked violently backward. But Rex didn't thrash. He didn't shake. He held, locked, still, measured, exactly as trained. Garrick tried to pull away, panic flooding his face as pain overtook arrogance. His knees buckled as he staggered, face twisting into something barely human. Get him off! Get him off! Rig's voice cut through the chaos, sharp and commanding now for the first time. Down! Rex released instantly. Not a second late, not a heartbeat early. He stepped back, chest high, breathing controlled, eyes never leaving Garrick as the contractor collapsed to the ground, clutching his arm. Blood soaked through the sleeve immediately, dark and spreading, his fingers trembling in useless shock. The yard had gone completely silent. Even the ocean beyond the wall seemed to hush. The second contractor froze where he stood, face pale, mouth slightly open, as if trying to form a word that never came. Every SEAL in the circle had shifted into alert stance now, not aggressive, not panicked, but ready just in case. Rig didn't move toward Rex. He didn't praise him. He didn't soothe him. He simply raised one hand slightly and said, calm and final, "Stay." Rex sat, right where he was, back straight, tongue drawn in, watching. It was the last detail that burned into everyone's memory. The control. The absolute discipline, even in the aftermath of violence. Medical personnel burst forward moments later, SEAL medic sliding in beside Garrick, cutting away his torn sleeve as he groaned in disbelief. I didn't mean, he gasped, eyes wide, sweat pouring down his temple. But no one answered him, because everyone there had seen exactly what he'd meant. And why this had happened, the demonstration zone no longer felt like a performance space. It felt like a battlefield moment, one where the aggressor had underestimated something he didn't understand, and paid for it. Rex remained perfectly still, tail barely moving, eyes shifting only once to glance at Rig, awaiting his next signal. Rig knelt slightly, voice low but steady. Good. Hold. The SEALs didn't cheer. They didn't speak. They simply watched, in stunned, quiet respect, because every man there knew the truth. That wasn't chaos. That was consequence. Medic, get a team down here now, Captain Dorsey's voice cut through the yard like a blade. Two SEAL medics were already moving. Not running, but fast, efficient. One dropped a trauma kit beside Garrick. The other peeled back his tactical glove to check radial pulse and motor response. The contractor's forearm was already swelling, skin torn, not shredded, but the angle of his wrist told everyone watching that something inside was broken. Badly. Garrick writhed, half sitting in the dirt, arm cradled across his chest. It bit me. He just... His voice was hoarse, edged with disbelief, as if this hadn't been his doing. The second medic was already wrapping a compression sleeve above the injury while muttering into his radio. Probable radius fracture with ulnar instability. Pupillary response intact. Vitals stable. Beginning prep for evac. Meanwhile, Rig hadn't moved from his position. He stood beside Rex, who was still sitting exactly where the order had left him. No tail wag, no panting, no pacing, just complete, eerie stillness. Rig didn't praise him, didn't kneel. He simply placed one hand gently on the dog's vest strap. A silent signal. You did your job. You stopped when I asked. You are still mine. One of the SEALs, who had been leaning against the rail earlier, now stood with both arms folded, face unreadable. Others behind him had fallen quiet, the kind of silence that comes not from uncertainty, but recognition. Recognition of violence, of control, of purpose. It wasn't that Rex had bitten someone, it was how. He had waited, assessed, held, released. That wasn't a dog reacting emotionally. That was a weapon executing under restraint. Command presence had changed now. More officers approached the field. Lieutenant Commander Hale, Fort Thorne's internal tactical coordinator, arrived with two staff members in tow. He glanced once at the downed contractor, then at Rig and Rex. Explain, he said. Captain Dorsey spoke before Rig needed to. Civilian observer violated boundary line, initiated multiple aggressive gestures despite verbal warnings. Final movement constituted a simulated strike at the canine's head. Hale's gaze locked on Garrick. You struck the dog? No, I was just joking around, Garrick stammered. It wasn't serious. Dorsey's reply was flat. The dog took it seriously. Hale turned to Rig. Asset control status? Maintained, Rig said calmly. No escalation beyond initial lock. Immediate compliance with disengagement. Hale nodded. Protocol incident classification. Tier 3. Elevate to command review. Full video to be pulled. Civilian medical transfer authorized. Two contractors were helping Garrick to his feet now, their earlier bravado stripped clean. Their faces were pale, eyes lowered, and not one of them looked at Rex. Because now they understood. This wasn't a pet, wasn't a prop, and it wasn't an act. The K9 hadn't reacted. He had responded to intent, to motion, to threat, and now he sat once again in the middle of the red-lined zone. Wind brushing past his fur, mouth closed, eyes forward, just waiting for his next command. They didn't move him. Rex stayed in the yard. While the medics wheeled Garrick out on a stretcher toward the base's medical bay, while the contractors followed behind in tense, awkward silence, and while senior staff filed their reports and pulled footage from 3 fixed cameras, Rex remained seated at the center of the red-lined field, exactly where the incident occurred, exactly where he'd been told to stay. No handler hovered over him. Riggs stood 10 feet away, speaking in low tones to a base investigator. But Rex never shifted, never slumped, never turned his head. He wasn't on edge. He wasn't proud. He was simply waiting. It was a posture the SEALs around him couldn't stop watching, especially now that the chatter had started, because the question wasn't why the dog bit the man. That part had become obvious. The question was who the dog was. One of the older SEALs, Lieutenant Marquez, had already pulled his tablet and run Rex's tactical badge code through internal ops. Another followed suit, tracing the embedded handler profile via Riggs' ID band. Quiet inquiries were bouncing across the bleachers like sonar. Subtle, professional, but persistent. And slowly, the information filtered through. Rex wasn't local. He wasn't Fort Thorne property. He was Joint Navy SOC. Prior deployments, 6, including Bahrain, Gulf of Aden, Eastern Horn, 2 intercepts involving pirate seizure, 1 container freighter infiltration, 3 deep port asset extractions, clearance level, elevated, engagement history, confirmed, disposition notes, extremely controlled under pressure, selective engagement instincts, predictive aggression triggers accurate within 0.7 S deviation. Someone near the rear murmured, "He's not even supposed to be here. This was a reassignment drill." Someone else replied, "No, it was a conditioning assessment. They're vetting him for reintegration into high-threat maritime ops." The energy in the yard had shifted again, no longer defensive, no longer curious. Now it was quiet awe. Because this dog hadn't been brought here for show. He was being monitored, tested for reclearance, and what everyone had just witnessed wasn't a malfunction. It was a pass. Commander Hale had stepped away from the medics and was now reviewing body cam stills. Rigg stood silently beside him, arms behind his back, saying nothing. He wasn't lobbying for protocol, wasn't making excuses. He didn't need to. The footage spoke for itself. One aggressive man, multiple warnings ignored, final movement, fast, direct, high target feint to the eyes. K9 response time, 1.03 seconds. Disengagement compliance, immediate upon vocal command. There was nothing reckless about what had happened. It had been pure control, followed by restraint. And now, across the field, SEALs who had spent their careers tracking high-value threats, clearing rooms in teams of 4, and fast roping into hostile zones, found themselves reevaluating everything they thought they knew about what a dog could do. Because Rex hadn't needed backup, he hadn't needed warning, he hadn't even needed a command. All he'd needed was a threat, and the rest had taken care of itself. By the time the official review convened that afternoon, the decision was already written on the faces of everyone who mattered. Not in words, in posture, in tone, in the fact that no one, not one officer, not one enlisted man, not one observer, used the word attack when referring to what Rex had done. They used words like response, containment, controlled action. The review board convened inside Fort Thorne's incident debriefing room, a plain, windowless chamber built for clarity, not comfort. Commander Hale led the panel. Captain Dorsey sat to his right. 2 internal affairs officers and 1 legal liaison joined. Chief Riggs stood calmly at parade rest beside his dog, who sat quietly at his left heel, not muzzled, not restrained. That in itself said everything. They played the footage 3 times, 1 from the pylon cam, 1 from Riggs' chest feed, 1 from the fixed drone overhead. Each angle told the same story. Warnings issued, boundary crossed, simulated strike thrown. Rex engaging at the exact moment of physical escalation, holding bite with measured pressure, not thrashing, not dragging, and then releasing the instant the command was given. One of the legal observers asked, flatly, "Did you use the bite and hold trigger phrase at any time?" Rigg shook his head once. "No, sir." Dog responded on visual threat posture, nonverbal escalation. "Did you issue any verbal correction to disengage?" "Yes." Single word command, complied immediately. There were no further questions. Garrick, meanwhile, was not present. He was in medical transport to a regional hospital for orthopedic surgery. Reports indicated 2 fractured bones and minor ligament tearing. The base surgeon noted, however, that the wounds were remarkably clean given the pressure involved, a forensic term for surgical control. The final classification of the incident was announced the next morning. Engagement tier, justified response trigger source, civilian protocol breach, K9. Disposition, operational integrity, confirmed handler, action within standard limits. Commander Hale met Rigg outside the debrief chamber after the decision. "You handled it," Rigg nodded. "He did." The commander looked down at Rex, who had just risen to his feet beside his handler, tail still, ears up. Then he looked back at Rigg. "Protocol update. From this point forward, he's no longer listed for reconditioning." He handed over a sealed folder. "He's cleared for redeployment." Rigg took it without comment. No one clapped. No one congratulated him. It wasn't that kind of culture, but every SEAL who passed Rex that afternoon stepped just slightly out of the way, a quiet acknowledgement. Not out of fear, out of respect, because the story was already circulating, and not the version Garrick would have told, the one where the dog bit without warning. No. This was the one where a man got warned 5 times, and didn't listen once. The sun was lower now, a softer gold spilling across the gravel of the demonstration yard. Most of the crowd had dispersed, called back to their respective units or reassigned to afternoon drills. But a few remained, the ones who'd seen it happen up close, the ones still processing. Rex lay at rest now, not asleep, never asleep on command grounds. His head rested between his front paws, ears half forward, eyes half lidded but alert. Every so often a breeze stirred the dirt around his paws, but he didn't flinch. Chief Rigg sat beside him on the edge of a concrete block, one knee raised, forearms draped over it. No leash in his hands, no visible tether, because none was needed. A pair of SEALs passed slowly behind them. No words, just quiet glances. One nodded once at Rigg, then looked at Rex, then kept walking. Another paused near the red line. A younger SEAL, late 20s maybe, standing with his hands on his hips, watching the dog for a long, motionless moment. Then, without saying anything, he simply gave a tight, silent salute. Not to the handler, to the dog. Commander Hale stood further back near the yard's edge, arms folded, watching the last few interactions like a man studying terrain that had just changed shape, because it had. No more jokes, no more muttering, no more sideways looks. The air was different now, and the red training zone, once a backdrop for scoffing comments and bored glances, now felt like something else entirely. A line no longer symbolic, but remembered. Rigg finally stood, brushing his palms together once, and gave a single click of his tongue. Rex stood too. No bark, no yawn, just clean movement. Precise and calm. They walked back across the yard together. Not toward applause, not toward ceremony, not toward anything loud, just forward. And behind them, the story was already settling into the gravel. Told not in words, but in the silence left behind. Would you have stepped into that red zone? What would you have done if you saw that strike coming? Let us know in the comments. If you respect the discipline of a dog like Rex, hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a drop. Share this with someone who still thinks combat dogs are just for patrol duty. And while you're here, check out the other stories now showing on screen. We'll see you tomorrow. Same time, brand new video.